Hello, hello my friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And video number 2 for this year's, technically not New Year's yet, so 2024 Valentine card series. I've posted one video so far. This is the second one. For those that aren't aware, when it comes to me personally and my Valentine series, I include a lot of generic cards in my Valentine series because we only need so many actual Valentine cards. So anything sort of love themed, even like thinking of you, I'll include in the Valentine series. Why not? And today's card, same sort of idea. We've got a little love you sentiment, but very non-Valentine colors. I went with blues this time, which I don't do very often. I don't know why. I don't know. And yeah, little die cuts. I added little birds again. I put a bird on it. And very simple watercoloring. I actually did some watercolor and then added texture with Copic markers. I used crackle paste, splatter, all the things. So if you keep watching, I will show you guys how I made this card. The first thing I needed to do was use my stencil and my paste. This is the Simon Says Stamp Hearty Tweed stencil that just came out a couple weeks ago, something. And no, earlier in the month. I think it was part of the December release. Anyway, no, I lied. It was the Smitten release that came out in the middle of the month. Again, I don't know what month it is. I don't know what day it is. It's just life. Anyway, this stencil is really cute, and I just wanted it to create kind of, I guess, a vague sort of background. I'm using some Ranger texture paste. This is the opaque Crackle, and Crackle paste is fun because when you let it dry, it just creates the coolest crackly texture. And I just applied it over the stencil with a palette knife. Purposely didn't do it smoothly. I didn't put my stencil on straight. This is just going to be kind of an element for the background. So I applied it, cleaned off my stencil, my palette knife, set that aside and let it dry. And while it was drying, I did all my little die cut pieces. So I used this little layered bird bunch wafer die set. I've used this in a previous video or two. They're just the cutest little birds. I love them. They're so small, and yeah, I've had this sitting here again wanting to use it, and I was like, oh, because I pulled out this Plentiful Petals die set. This is also from, I think, the Smitten release. It's a newer one. Anyway, and I was like, oh, a little bird can be like sitting in these little flowers. Why not? So I also die cut Canson XL watercolor paper with these wafer dies. That's what I used for the stenciling too. I can't remember if I mentioned that. Canson XL watercolor paper. Pretty much my go-to for just about everything because it's cheap and it's heavyweight and it works. Why not? So I die cut my pieces and I stuck them to just one of my stick and stamp mats. Because when I'm doing watercoloring, especially of little die cuts, I like the stick and stamp mats because it holds them a little better. I use my grip mats, like my Waffle ones. Those I use for pretty much everything else. So got all my little die cuts assembled or like laid out on that stick and stamp mat. And then my background by this point, the crackle paste was completely dry. And I'll show at the end, like close up, but you'll also see it here as I'm adding the watercolor over it. It like seeps in to the little crackly bits. I love it. It's so simple because you guys saw me apply it. I applied it in real time with the stenciling part there at the beginning. No time at all, you know? And then for all this watercoloring, this is my Mijello Mission Gold watercolor palette. You can use any watercolors for this. You could use inks, kind of anything, really. Yeah, I love this little palette. I've had this, I don't even know how many years ago I got this, and I still haven't had to refill any of those, but also I don't use this like all the time, really, because I jump around coloring methods like whatever, you know, just whatever I'm fixating on. Anywho, I've sped this up, but honestly, this did not take very long. This is another one of my favorite things to do. Is watercoloring on die cuts. My other favorite thing is like ink smushing on die cuts. It's just fun. It really is. I don't know. I personally find it's like therapeutic. I don't know, especially doing it like this. I'm just not overthinking it. I am just slapping on this color. I kept it fairly simple with the color combo. Like I said in the intro, I went with blues. Just something a little different because I was originally gonna do the colors in like pinks and purples, you know, kind of more Valentine-y sort of colors. But I'm like, what's the opposite of that? I was like, blue. Why not? You know? So I just used various shades of blue watercolors from my palette. My little brush is just a cheapo Nouveau brush, same brush set I've had for, again, eons. And yeah, you don't need anything special. My biggest, I guess, bit of advice, if with things like this, with watercolor over like die cuts, is the watercolor paper itself. Higher quality paper will give you better results, 100%. However, just making sure it's a heavier weight helps a lot, especially when you're adding a lot of water to them. If it's really, really thin watercolor paper, it'll start to curl up quite quickly, and that can just get a bit annoying. But yeah, the Canson XL stuff, I've been using this for years. I've used it in a bajillion videos. It works great. So for my little birdies, I painted them to kind of look like chickadees. I've talked about this before. I avoided using like bird images, die cuts, stamps, etc. on my cards for years. I don't know. I couldn't get out of my own head with it and like way overthought it. And then just had a good talking to with myself to follow my own advice, because it's the same thing I tell everyone, is just don't overthink it. They're cards. You know, people get hung up a lot of times on like realism and like, well, that's not how it looks in nature, or, you know, all the things. It's a card, honestly. Like, does it matter in the end? I don't think so. All that matters is I had fun making it, and I hope the person I give it to enjoys it. That's it. I'm not going to sit and worry. And if they're going to be like, well, that's not how the birds look in nature, I just won't make them another card, you know? So I got over my thing with birds, and now they're like my favorite thing to add to cards. I love it. I love making little die cut birdies and sticking them on my cards. Like, yeah, just like that Portlandia clip, you know, put a bird on it. Anyway, assembling these, very, very simple. These little Plentiful Petals wafer dies, they're very sort of whimsical, and you can just kind of do whatever you want, honestly. Even those like the blue flowers I assembled there at the top of the screen, you could just not and just leave them like individual pieces, and they're just multiple little, you know, flowers. But then assembling them like this, you know, makes them look like kind of a full flower, but it's just personal preference, you know? So very simple. The centers obviously just all fit in. I just use washi tape. That's kind of just always my go-to now when assembling like dies like that don't have like a backing. Stick some washi tape on just as sort of a placeholder, and then I add a little bit of extra glue just for a little bit of security, you know, to really hold things in place, and then pop the pieces in. And then the birds come together really easily as well. I only use 2 from the pack because like when you die cut it, you get pieces to create 4 little birds. Like you can have them facing each other, things like that. I could have done that on these, like had the birds like use the other ones and had them sort of facing each other on the cards. But again, this wasn't specifically like straight up Valentine's. It's Valentine's adjacent. Yeah, that's what I'm going with. So I assemble all the pieces. My reverse tweezers came in very handy with some of the little pieces. And then this ended up being an afterthought. I was like, it needs something. So I just pulled out some Copic markers and just added dot details. I've done this a lot, usually more with like just actual like alcohol marker coloring. I find that adding little dot details kind of helps add some texture, adds a little dimension, can sometimes break up especially if my coloring ends up being a little flat looking or I'm just not super happy with it. I like adding little dots, but for this, I was happy with how the watercolor turned out. It was great. I loved all the like texture and whatnot I had going on, but this just gives more, you know, more is more. So I just used random colors. I'll have them all linked, but I just used different colors of Copic markers and just added that dot detail. So I just vary my pressure. You know, you press a little harder, you get a bigger dot. Barely touch the watercolor paper, you get a little dot. And yes, I've also mentioned I don't recommend using Copics on watercolor paper. However, I'm not coloring on this. I'm just, you know, adding little dot details, so I'm not worried about it. And the only reason why I don't recommend it is watercolor paper is very porous. You know, it wants to soak in what you're applying to it. and alcohol markers, it will literally like suck the ink out of your alcohol markers if you use it on watercolor paper. You'll get great results, but you'll find your markers go very dry very quickly. So that's why I don't recommend it. But for things like this, it's fine. It's fine. So I just added a whole bunch of little details to the birds and the leaves and the flower centers and then the flowers themselves. And then my background was now dry. So I trimmed this down. I ended up trimming it down quite a bit. I trimmed it down to like 3 3¾ by 5. So a fair bit smaller than what my A2 card base will be, because the card base will kind of add a nice frame to this. So I just used my guillotine trimmer to trim this down. And I also trimmed down the sentiments I'm going to use. And those are from the All the Love Sentiment Strip pack. And like always, I'll have links to all the things in the description box below the video. And once I had my little sentiment strips trimmed out and my like background trimmed down, I'm going to start assembling everything. I also decided to die cut some vellum with this FIDDLY leaf. I love the name of this one. Wafer die. I've used this in a bunch of videos too. I forget when this came out. I've had it for a while. But I die cut vellum with it just so I could add, you know, it's like a little extra filler. It's very soft and faint, you know, and not super distracting. So I trimmed down the pieces after I had die cut them with my scissors just to shorten them up a bit, and then created my little cluster on this background using mostly just craft tacky glue, just kind of tucking it in here and there. And then for some of the little flowers and then the little bird, I'm just going to use some thin foam squares just to pop these into place to create a little bit more dimension and also just to adhere them really well. And then I wasn't thinking, and I adhered my sentiment because I wasn't sure. Like in the back of my mind, I had been thinking about splatter, of course. And I'm going to fix that though. So I adhered all the little bits to the card front. And then once I was kind of happy with all my placement, I'm just tucked everything in, let the glue dry. And then I have this like little stack of thick cardstock, and I don't know where it came from. I don't know where it came from. I don't even know, but I don't like it. I don't like it. I would never use it for card fronts or anything like that. It's just, it's got a weird texture to it and not a nice texture. I don't like it, but it's pretty thick and heavyweight. And I was like, I'll just use it to create dimension. That's a great way to use it up. So that's what I've been doing. So I trimmed it down slightly smaller than that background and adhered it to the back of the background. So that helps flatten it out a bit, especially when I'll adhere it to my actual card base, because the background is warped from like the stenciling and then the watercoloring I'd done. So on the inside of my card, I adhered my remaining little die cuts and my second little bird and my little companion sentiment strip. And my card base is a Nina Desert Storm card base. And I actually did a side fold card. This is the first time I've done this in ages. I can't remember the last time I've done a side fold card. People ask me that quite often, like why a lot of us do like top fold cards. Honestly, it became a thing because it was easier to photograph back in the day when, you know, all of us do this for, you know, design teams and content and etc. And top folding was just way easier to photograph. And then it just kind of stuck. I don't know what it is. I prefer top folding cards. Side fold is just feels foreign to me. I know it's weird, but yeah, I had this piece of Desert Storm cardstock that was the right size. And I was like, I'm just going to make a side fold card. So yeah, that's the reason. That's the big reason why a lot of us do top folding cards. And now it doesn't matter because most of us do like flat lay photography anyway, so it's kind of irrelevant. But things have changed, but old habits, you know? So, splatter. I did want to go with splatter. So I just took that washi tape and just put it over the sentiment because I didn't want to get splatter on the sentiment, because sometimes it can just, you know, it's one thing if it's a little tiny dot, but other times it's like, oh, you don't protect it, and then you get like a big splotch, you know, right on the sentiment that makes it not legible. So the washi tape just took care of that. And then I used my Gonzai Tombi Starry colors. And this time I used that kind of red gold color, which I almost never use. But I thought that would be just a very nice contrast to all the blues. So I had added water to it, swirled it up with my little fan brush. I'd put the card into my splat box, added that gold splatter, and then same thing, just had to let that dry. Before you could let the splatter dry, I couldn't. I very carefully removed the remove the washi tape, trying not to touch any of the actual splatter. And I just use my little reverse tweezers again to get that out of there. And then the final little bit of embellishment, I have these Night Sky Navy satin pearls from Trinity Stamps, and I just kind of sprinkled those throughout this little cluster I had created, and then, you know, fiddled with that for a bit until I was happy with it. And then once I was, I'm going to adhere all these into place with just dabs of craft tacky glue, just using my embellishment wand to pick them up, put down a little bit of glue, and then that's it. So this card was fun, honestly. I don't know. I really enjoy the little bits of watercolor and the little birds. I don't know. They bring me joy. It's fun. So there's all that crackle texture. Oh, I'm probably going to fixate on crackle paste again and do like a bunch of videos with it. But yeah, it was loads of fun. So as always, I will have links below the video to my blog post. I will have a supply list. I'll link to all the supplies I used. And then at the end of the video, I will post I'll post the other video I did for the Valentine series, and then I'll do up a playlist one of these days as well. So you guys can check all that out if you're interested. Thank you all so very much for watching, thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.